So, Dreamy Dream per se is about 22 years old. I'm one of the co-founders, one of the 11 co-founders of the organization. Most of us were 21, 22-year-olds when we started the organization, so very young, and before we kind of got into our careers. Uh, so where I came into the idea itself was that uh, after I finished my university, I got a chance to go on an exchange program to Finland for 3 months. And I was 21 years old, and it was a great opportunity for me to go to another country and learn. When I was in Finland is when I started thinking about what do I want to do with my career, what are the choices I want to make. And there were two experiences that struck me, which helped me then come back and float the idea of Dream a Dream. One is Finland works on a strong social welfare economy system. So there's very high dignity of labor. So I made friends with a bartender at a local bar. I made friends with a security guard at a five-star hotel. And it was absolutely fine to be able to do that, which was very unlike in India, the kind of background I came from. I wouldn't just go out and make friends with a security guard or a bartender. Hopefully things have changed in the last 2 decades. But the second thing that struck me was the level of pride that people took in the kind of life and career choices they made. So there are many young people in university who would go out and start their own organizations, go volunteer in countries like India, Mexico, Latin America, start their own social impact organizations, which is very different from a very linear approach in India, right? You go to school, get top grades, go to college, get top grades, get a job, right? And your life then moves on from there. So that struck me, saying I don't have to follow the linear path. I can possibly explore what I want to do with my life. So keeping those in mind, I came back to India with this idea of that I want to change the way we look at dignity in India. That how can we create a society where every human being is respected for who they are, irrespective of the backgrounds they come from. And I started talking to a bunch of friends about it, and then we came together and said, okay, let's start something about and do something about this. So that's how Dream Dream was born. We ran it as a voluntary organization for the first 2 years, which is when I was working in the corporate sector. So I was working with an investment bank. And while I was my full-time role at the investment bank through the week, on evenings and on weekends is when I spent time with Dream Dream. And also started volunteering with many other non-profit organizations to deepen my own understanding of children's issues and why children live in poverty and what causes some of the challenges that children are facing. So after 2 years of doing that, I had reached a place in my own personal journey through reflections that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I had two choices. One is to continue to work in the corporate sector, build some sense of financial independence for me and my family, and then move into the social sector, or to do it right now, move into the social sector right now, learn while I'm doing the job, make my mistakes, start building the organization from here on. And I obviously chose the latter and joined Dream a Dream full time in early 2002. And since then, I've been the CEO and now the co-founder. So the After School Life Skills program is the oldest program that Dream a Dream has. Been running it since 2002. And the TechConnect program has been running since 2010. When we started the organization and we started reaching out to children in distress, we were working with children in care homes. We were working with children who were in residential schools because their parents could not take care of them. We were working with abandoned boys who had either been orphaned or had run away from home. And what we realized when we started working with these kids is that their basic needs were taken care of by the other organizations: food, clothing, education, shelter. What these kids needed was access to learning opportunities to develop their own sense of self, develop their personality, and have the skills to make a successful transition into adulthood. That's when we stumbled upon this idea of life skills. And we said, let's offer life skills as an after-school program. So In the care homes, it was usually in the evenings and the weekends when we used to run the program. When we started working with schools itself, is when we designed it as an after-school program. The program basically today, the way it stands, it works with about 5,000 kids in Bangalore. It's an innovation lab that works with about 25 schools. And the focus of the after school program is to use play and art as a medium to help develop life skills like creative thinking, problem solving, self awareness, managing conflict, resolving dilemmas and issues amongst children who come from marginalized backgrounds. The program is offered to children from grade 4 to grade 10. The Career Connect program was a natural progression for us. As the kids in our after school program started getting older, they started coming to us with more questions around, okay, what should I do with my life after school? Should I join college? Should I join work? Should I do a diploma? How do I know what I'm interested in? What skills do I need to go find a job? And we realized the kids had a lot of these questions, but not necessarily opportunities to address some of these questions. So the Career Connect program is delivered through 2 centers that we have today, which are based in marginalized communities. The space is open for any kid from 14 years and upwards, usually till about 21. And once a young person comes into the space, they register into a space, they get some programs by default. So they might join a life skills program, a spoken English program, IT skilling program, financial management program, communication skills program. In addition, what they get access to is abilities to develop life skills, access to mentors, access to scholarships, access to job opportunities, internship opportunities, and a team that tracks them till we feel that they're at a place where they can make their own life and career choices without our support. So it's usually a 7 to 9 year engagement in the career program. So through the 2 centers, we work again with about 5,000 young people in Bangalore. These 2 programs today, we don't scale, we don't grow them, keep it to these numbers. They're designed as an innovation lab where we try new pedagogical approaches, we introduce new curriculum, we assess the impact of the programs on every kid, and we bring in the best technologies and best innovations from across the world in the way the learning happens for the young. Why we chose life skills? Obviously, when you look at education itself 2 decades back, a lot of the education focus was on helping children who come from marginalized backgrounds to do well in education. So give them extra tuition classes, help them develop their literacy and numeracy skills. Because the belief then was that if children do well in school, if they get good grades, then it will create opportunities for them to get out of poverty because it will open up more job opportunities for them. That was not true for children coming from difficult backgrounds. And there were 2 reasons for that. One is that the pace of change in the world itself has become increasingly fast and complex, and the future has become increasingly uncertain. For example, there's research that said that 65% of the jobs that young people today will enter into in, say, 10 years from now have not yet been created. If you go back even 5 or 6 decades, my father, for example, has had one profession, one job his entire life, and possibly just in one organization. The same message I got. If you go to school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, find a job, stay in the job, you'll do well. But today you see increasingly more and more people not just change jobs, but also change careers multiple times. And there's this constant need to reskill yourself. So in such a scenario, then just focusing on numeracy, literacy, and academic education is not going to prepare our children for a complex, uncertain future. The second lens, which is less talked about, is the lens of adverse childhood experiences. The children who come from extreme poverty have invariably experienced one or more adverse experiences in their childhood. These could be lack of food or nutrition, lack of emotional care, neglect, being abandoned, orphaned, in extreme cases, exposure to abuse, violence. Now, there is enough research to tell us that when children experience any of these adversities, it impacts their ability to achieve developmental milestones. Now, the way to understand that is that today, if you have an infant, you will suddenly not see this infant jump out of the cradle and start running. The infant will learn to turn, will learn to crawl, will learn to stand up, will learn to walk, then will learn to learn. Each of those are developmental milestones. So just like there are physical developmental milestones, there are also mental and emotional developmental milestones. There's a certain age when children start picking up language skills. And at that age, you introduce them to 4 languages also, they'll pick it up. There's a certain age when they start recognizing emotions and start responding to emotions. Each of these are developmental milestones that need to happen at the right sensitive period. But when children experience adversity, they don't achieve these developmental milestones. Let's take an example of language. Language is learned through when children learn to speak and adults are speaking to them. Now, if you're living in extreme poverty where both your parents are going to work almost 10 to 12 hours or 14 hours a day, you have been taking care of an older sibling who also has limited vocabulary, limited language skills. You're not interacting through the day. You're not building vocabulary. You're not building communication. You're not building words. Right? So then language development gets delayed. Because of adverse childhood experiences and missing these developmental milestones, children experience something called failure to thrive, which means they have not achieved the developmental milestones at the right time. And then when they enter a school environment at the age of 4 or 5, they're not prepared. They don't know how to learn. They don't know how to pay attention, concentrate. They don't know how to sit in a class for 30 minutes. They don't know how to listen to the teacher and absorb what has been taught. So then the learning gaps just keep increasing. So what we have to recognize is a combination of an uncertain future and fast-changing future and the impact of adverse childhood experiences keeps children from poverty behind. What we realized is that when we help these children develop life skills, it builds in these children the capacities to overcome adversity, catch up to their developmental milestones, also build the capacities to be self-learners, lifelong learners, and be better prepared to adapt to an uncertain, complex future. The pandemic has been a high impact experience for everyone, right? Not just for kids achieving the dream. When the first wave happened and the school closures and lockdowns happened, we did not do any panic response. What we did was, let's just spend time in listening to our young people, listening to the parents and teachers, understanding what their needs are, and then responding. In the first lockdown, most of the parents and teachers and schools were like, okay, this is probably just for a couple of months. We're going to get out of this. None of us knew the impact of the pandemic is going to go on for 2 years, 2.5 years. So not much support was required. Right? Everyone was just playing the waiting game. And then when the extensions of lockdown and school closures continued and the second wave hit, we as an organization had to pivot to a COVID response organization. We started getting tremendous distress calls from children. Distress calls were around anxiety, don't know what's going to happen, what about my future, what about my learning and schooling, I have ill parents, I have COVID in my family, what should we do? So we very quickly had to become a COVID response organization. And we looked at it from different parameters. So one, we realized that children and parents and teachers need mental and emotional health support because there was a lot of anxiety around this. So we created a team and we brought together some experts from outside and created a helpline where children, parents and teachers could call in and they could get emotional and mental health support. The second thing we said is we set up some kind of a COVID war room that any kind of distress calls that we get from children and young people, we will respond to them. It might be, give me access to doctors, give me access to medicine, get me an ambulance. I need support with crematorium services. I need support with medical emergencies. We don't have food at home, so we need access to food. And as we started identifying the patterns of distress calls, and we started preparing ourselves in the backend to respond within 24 hours. The third was around learning itself. For the older kids that we were working with, who were 10th grade and above, they had some self-learning capacities, so we got them access to technology, so internet packages, phones with prepaid internet on them, in many cases access to tablets. Nearly, I think, 1,000 or 1,100 young people, we got them tablets so they could learn online virtually sitting at home. For the younger kids, we realized that virtual learning is not working. But what they needed was just to feel a sense of joy and hope through learning and engagement. So we converted our life skills curriculums and created activity sheets around them. So each kid got some kind of a home learning kit, which could be using art-based programs. What can you learn at home? Using different kinds of play, games, activities. What can you do at home? So that really helped the kids to stay engaged in the learning. For kids who could get engaged with virtual learning, the schools we partner with, we got them access to that. We also work with about 5 state governments across India, which is how we work with nearly about 1 million odd kids. So the governments obviously responded quite actively to technology. So in Delhi, for example, where we run the Anchor the Happiness curriculum along with the Delhi government, we set up an IVR system where a parent could call a number, and then they'll get a call back, and they will get a lesson or an activity from the happiness curriculum that the parent can then listen into and then do it with the kids in their own home and also bring in kids from the neighborhood. In Uttarakhand and Jharkhand, we helped the government set up Facebook live sessions, YouTube sessions, set up WhatsApp groups. So activities could be sent through WhatsApp, activity sheets, helping teachers develop activity sheets. So learning could go up through WhatsApp groups. So there's a lot of response like that. Unfortunately, our initial studies told us that the level of engagement was very limited because one is children obviously can't learn much through the phone, but just even access to internet, access to technology was very limited for the children. So it didn't work. But we had to show that we are responding in some way, which we did. See, technology is here to stay. And one of the good things that happened in the pandemic was that very, very quickly, in a very short span of time, a lot of technology solutions emerged. Whether it was virtual learning, whether it was low-tech solutions, innovative solutions, a lot of it, and a lot of content that was earlier delivered offline could very easily move online. So there was a massive galvanization and collective efforts on converting a lot of offline content to online learning, which is great. The pandemic also pushed many teachers across the system, private and public education systems, to pick up technological skills, start delivering virtual learning sessions. So technology is here to stay. Technology will play a role in learning. However, as we know, that it didn't necessarily provide solutions equitably. So technology will always have limited impact as long as it is designed just for a few. Right? Even now, as we look at the learning gaps that are emerging, kids who had access to good technology, virtual learning, structured learning, supportive family systems, access to internet all the time, have moved forward, but kids who didn't have any of those are actually struggling a lot more. So the equity gaps have increased. So unless technology can actually take a step back, or people who provide technological solutions in learning can take a step back and ask some of these hard questions around what role can technology play in learning equitably, inclusively, solutions from technology will only work for a few. And that is a big worry with technological solutions. So if you look at social emotional learning or life skills, they have always been important. They were important in the 19th century, they're important in the 20th century, they've been important in the 21st century. The pandemic just brought their importance to the forefront. Uh, Through the pandemic, as we see children who have gone through emotional and mental distress, as they've gone through periods of uncertainty and anxiety, the need for social emotional learning environments, social emotional interventions has just increased. Even now, as kids have started coming back to school, we're realizing there are a lot of behavioral challenges. Children have forgotten how to engage in learning in a structured learning environment like a classroom. In a survey that we did in one of the states we work in, teachers told us that children are coming in with distressful behavior in the classroom. They're not listening to the teachers, they're answering back, they're being violent in the classroom. So teachers are also at a loss. Behavioral challenges with children have continued post the pandemic also, which has brought to the forefront the need to integrate social emotional learning within the school environment. Curriculums like the happiness curriculum in Delhi have gained increased importance now in children's lives, in classroom environments, in the school calendar itself. There is now a tension between should we focus on the learning gaps and focus on literacy, numeracy, and helping children catch up to those learning gaps, or should we invest in social emotional learning? If we look at this as a binary of either or, then there's no solution. We have to look at it that when we invest in social emotional learning capacities of children, their ability to then become self-learners, lifelong learners, their ability to build structural learning capacities will increase, which will then increase their ability to catch up to learning gaps of numeracy, literacy. So look at it as a foundation. Social emotional learning is a foundation to how learning happens. To give you an example, if you go back to your own ability to learn as an infant, the first experience of structured learning that a lot of kids have is when their parents or grandparents tell them a story. Like imagine a kid in the lap of a grandparent, and the grandparent is telling them a story when they're just 2 years old. Right? That's the first time your brain is registering your ability to pay attention, to concentrate. That's the first time you're building the ability for structured learning. And when you have that kind of a supportive environment at home, when you go into the classroom, your brain is wired for structured learning, wired for listening. But when you go through a traumatic experience like a pandemic, or if you have not had support systems like that at home, where your parents or grandparents are not available to help you build those structured learning abilities, you don't have it. And if the school does not offer that, and the school is only interested in pushing you to learn the alphabet and learn the numbers, and you're not really focusing on how to learn, then you keep just increasing the gap in learning. So you have to understand the science of learning itself. The science of learning requires that every child has the foundations to be a learner. And then when you expose them to subjects, to knowledge, to information, then their ability to absorb that increases. So we don't have to look at this as an either or, it's an and. There are various measures now that we use. In our work directly with about 10,000 young people in Bangalore through the after school and the after school life skills program and the Career Connect program, we have developed assessment tools. So we have a life skills assessment scale, which is a first of its kind, validated, statistically proven, academically approved, published scale that helps us measure improvements in life skills for every child. It's a scale now that we've been using for 12 years. And we generate an impact report that talks about the impact of our programs using the life skills assessment scale. So over the years, we've seen over 90% of the kids who are part of our programs, whether it's the after school program or the Career Connect program, have shown significant improvements in life skills year on year. In our work with teachers that we do, teachers and educators, where we train them on pedagogical approaches of creativity, empathy, play, and art, we use external evaluation metrics. So there is something called the Net Promoter Score, which looks at what has been the impact of the program on the participant, like a teacher, and how likely are they to recommend the program to other teachers like them. And the net promoter score has consistently been about 65 and above. The global average for a good net promoter score is under 50. So in that sense, our programs have been doing very well. In our work with the governments itself, we look at impact at the system level. So, for example, in Uttarakhand and in Delhi, where we have introduced the happiness curriculum, we look at the level of engagement and buy-in of the curriculum inside the government system. So in Delhi, for example, all 1,024 public schools in Delhi, every kid from kindergarten to grade 8, which is about 800,000 kids, get access to a happiness class every day, 6 days a week. And the number of schools who have now integrated the happiness class within the school calendar is a matrix of success. And how that has led to then behavioral changes in students and in teachers, which we measure through tools that we have developed. In the other states, it's still early days for us to measure metrics, but what we're looking at is across the government system, administrators, school leaders, teachers, the level of acceptance to the idea of integrating life skills and social emotional learning curriculums within school systems. So increasingly, we are seeing more and more states like Jharkhand, Telangana, Karnataka, who want to integrate life skills and social emotional learning within the school calendar, within school curriculums, within teacher training platforms. So that's a matrix of success there. And finally, what we're seeing is the conversations and the narratives around life skills and SEL that are happening in the country. For example, 20 years back when Dream started talking about life skills, very few organizations were talking about life skills. Today, you see increasingly more and more nonprofits in the education space are integrating life skills and social emotional learning. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more governments are talking about it. The National Education Policy of 2020 talks about integrating life skills and social emotional learning. So the number of conversations that are happening around life skills and social emotional learning across the education ecosystem has gone up tremendously. It's become more mainstream. And that's one matrix of success of our work. Gunj, of course, is a very well-known national organization. They are a pioneering organization in the way they've converted urban waste from cities into assets and resources for rural communities. Gunj's impact spreads across the country, over 30 states. Their impact is not only seen in disaster response, which is very active, but also in the way they are empowering local rural communities to identify their own challenges locally and find solutions. And they've created this whole model of circular economy, which is almost a non-monetary economy, right, where waste becomes a resource and labor becomes a resource in the communities. So Gunj, of course, I could do an entire session talking about Gunj separately. Partners for Youth Empowerment is a US-based organization that has been working with youth empowerment using the arts for over 35 years. They are one of the pioneering organizations in the world that have designed pedagogical approaches to how do you unlock potential in youth, especially youth that come from marginalized backgrounds. And Dream has been working with Partners for Youth Empowerment since 2010, where they have come in and helped us train a lot of our team and staff on their pedagogical approaches, helped us develop a lot of our life skills curriculum, and help strengthen our own understanding of how we can unlock youth potential. So that's how we are connected to Partners for Youth Empowerment. Today, a big part of our work is to work with state governments with some of the national education agencies. And our approach there is how do we help more and more governments to integrate life skills and social emotional learning, whether it's in curriculum reform, whether it's in pedagogical reform, whether it's in teacher training, or in the design and implementation of assessment practices. So that's a big piece of the work. Through this, what we're trying to aim at is that we redefine the purpose of education from academic excellence and grades and doing well in exams to the idea of thriving. That every child has the capacity and the ability to thrive, and how can education system integrate this idea of thriving? And thriving for us is an idea that's equitable, where it does not have a single matrix, which is around go to school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, get a job, get a high paying job, get an income, and you're set for life. That narrative is no longer true for every child. It works only for the top 20%. But 80% of the kids don't necessarily follow that pathway. But if you repurpose education to the idea of thriving, then every child can find success. And success can be defined very differently. Success includes, of course, career, income, financial independence, but it also includes, do young people have access to housing, public transport, a healthy environment to live, quality of life? Do kids have a healthy family, supportive environments that they can reach out to? Do kids have access to health services? Do kids have ability to contribute to their community, to their city, to their state? Do kids have the capacities to be a good citizen and contribute back to their communities and societies? Do kids have access to a sense of self-identity, pride, sense of ownership of the spaces that they live in? So it could just open up a whole set of things, right? So a kid who might probably take 10 years to come out of poverty because of the life and career choices they make does not feel like a failure. They can actually say, you know what, I have a good family support system, I have access to good public services, I have access to health services, I have a good quality of life with access to a clean planet, a clean neighborhood, clean parks around me. My family is doing well, we don't have health emergencies. That also is an aspect of success, right? So we have to really redefine what success looks like in the 21st century for every child. And our approach in the next 5 to 7 years, or how much ever longer it takes, is how does every child come out of an education system feeling like they have the life skills and the capacities to succeed in life with the idea of thriving.